Good morning, you're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani, live on A News. Here are your top stories. Trump says Putin will not attack Ukrainian cities for a week due to the cold weather. The EU lists Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. And Niger's military ruler vows retaliation after gunfire and explosions heard in the capital. First this morning, US President Donald Trump says he secured a temporary pause in Russian strikes on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, citing extreme winter conditions. The Kremlin has stopped short of confirming any formal agreement, while the European Union accuses Moscow of using energy and winter as weapons of war. Here's the latest.
US President Donald Trump says Russian President Vladimir Putin has agreed to refrain from firing on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities for 1 week, citing record-breaking winter conditions.
And because of the cold, extreme cold, they have the same that we do. And I personally asked President Putin not to fire into Kiev and the various towns for a week. And he agreed to do that because on top of everything else, that's not what they need is missiles coming into their towns and cities. So I just thought I should say it. I thought it was a very good thing, and Ukraine was almost, they didn't believe it, but they were very happy about it because they are struggling badly.
Moscow has not confirmed any formal agreement. The Kremlin declined to comment on reports of a broader pause in strikes, including on energy infrastructure, while saying diplomatic contacts remain possible.
Нет, я не могу пока это комментировать.
I can't comment on that yet. The modalities will be negotiated until the meeting itself, but everything will be done to ensure the possibility of continuing the dialogue.
Возможность для продолжения диалога.
From Brussels, the European Union delivered a sharply critical response. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas accused Moscow of targeting civilians and deliberately using winter as a weapon, while announcing new emergency support for Ukraine.
Russia is not making an even token effort towards peace. Now, energy is the new front line. The EU is responding with biggest ever winter aid package. This covers emergency equipment, funding and energy deliveries. Just today, we provided an extra 500 generators and 50 million euro for energy support. Overall, our energy fund has surpassed 1.6 billion euro.
Despite diplomatic efforts, Russian strikes have already damaged Ukraine's energy network, leaving hundreds of apartment buildings in Kyiv without heating or electricity, as temperatures remain well below freezing. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the US initiative, saying a pause in attacks on energy infrastructure could ease pressure on civilians, but warned that the real test will be whether any commitments are honored.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe. And we first head to the A News website, which is also leading with Putin agreed to halt Kyiv strikes for a week, Trump says. Now, we do know that Moscow actually hasn't confirmed this. The Kremlin hasn't said that they are actually doing this. However, Ukraine has stated that this is extremely reasonable and they look forward to stops taking place in regards to the war happening over there. Ukraine's president welcomed Trump's announcement and said he expected Russia to keep its promise, though, as I mentioned, the Kremlin hasn't confirmed. Trump did not specify when the pause would begin, but temperatures in the Ukrainian capital are due to plummet from Thursday night to reach minus 24 Celsius, that's minus 11 Fahrenheit in the next few days. Russia has intensified its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure during the bitter winter. And US President, as you just heard, stated that he had personally spoken to President Putin not to fire into Kyiv and the various towns for the week. Now, that story is also trending on the New York Times. Trump says Putin agreed to a week-long pause in attacks amid extreme cold. So we will definitely be watching that to find out when that starts and whether or not the Kremlin will confirm that it is something that they are going to do. Okay, now we move on to the next headline, which is currently on the Deutsche website, so the DW, stating that EU designates Iran's Revolutionary Guard as a terror group. So the EU listed Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Group as a terrorist organization, and that is in response to the regime's brutal repression of protesters. So writing on social media X, Kaya Kallis stated that repression cannot go unanswered. The EU's foreign policy chief, she said that on Thursday. Any regime that kills thousands of its own people is working towards its own demise, is what she wrote. The EU also added 15 Iranian government officials and 6 organizations to its sanctions list for their role in serious human rights violations in repression of protesters. Those are the latest additions that the EU has sanctioned on those, stating that the sanctions also are included on 247 individuals, 50 entities over human rights violations, and there are separate restrictions including asset freezes, travel bans, which have been imposed on Iranian people and organizations aiding Russia's war in Ukraine. So why has this happened? Another reason for it is because it comes after Donald Trump told Tehran to negotiate a deal on the future of its nuclear program or face military action. So we know that a number of US military vessels are positioned around the Gulf, and Iran has stated that it is ready for whatever happens. Now, Russia has deepened ties with Iran since its full-scale invasion of the Ukraine war, and we know that more than 30,000 people may have been killed in the latest wave of repression in Iran, and that's according to some estimates. Those figures have not yet been confirmed, but a number around that figure is stating that that's how many people have actually been killed. And human rights groups say a revenge campaign has been unleashed by the regime, with doctors and healthcare workers facing death sentences for treating badly injured protesters. So that's a story that is currently making a headline and on this particular website as well. We'll now go over to our next story, which is on BBC, stating that suspected jihadists attack airport near Niger's capital. So this happened towards yesterday evening. Niger's military ruler has now vowed retaliation against gunfire explosions heard in the capital. So overnight gunfire and explosions were heard, and he's blamed without any evidence on France, Benin and the Ivory Coast. The president there says he vows retaliation. He said, "We have heard them bark, they should be ready to hear us roar." The president also thanked the Russian troops stationed at the base for defending their sector. The shooting and detonations began shortly after midnight on Wednesday, according to residents of a neighborhood near the airport. Due to heavy security has been deployed around the main airport in Niger's capital of Niamey. The country has been grappling for a while with armed groups linked to Islamic State and Al-Qaeda affiliates who have been launching attacks on the tri-border region with Mali, Burkina Faso in particular. And now those particular countries have actually turned to Russia for help and support instead of Western military powers due to tackling insurgencies in their countries. Okay, now we move to our next headline that's also trending, and that's Al Jazeera. On that, and that's basically Israel seeks more exits than entries at Gaza Rafah as Egypt objects. So we know that after the last hostage was returned, that Hamas returned the last hostage over to Israel. Israel is now looking to open the Rafah border, and they're hoping to do that on Sunday, which is the 1st of February. However, Egypt is saying that there are not enough entries and exits coming in. They expect quite a number of people to be making that crossing in and out of Gaza and in and out of Egypt. Now, coming out of Egypt, coming into Egypt, there's not many checks, but coming out from Egypt into Gaza, there are a number of rigorous checks, from x-rays to searches to making sure that the correct documentation is on each and every person coming in. So it's a number that Egypt and Israel are in discussions with to make sure that the Rafah border crossings, people get all that they need, as well as there are a number of individuals that are also citing health concerns, that they need health and assistance and doctors to help them due to a number of hospitals that are no longer in operation due to the war in Gaza. Okay, so that's the press roundup for now. We're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Stay with us. Welcome back to Daybreak. Now let's take a look at the global stories. The European Union has taken its toughest step yet against Iran, designating the Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organisation. The move allows EU states to criminalise links to the group and sharply increases pressure on Tehran.
The region does not need a new war. That's according to European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas when asked if the bloc would support US military action against Iran. The comment comes as the EU has designated Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, as a terrorist organisation. It marks the bloc's strongest move yet against Tehran. The move follows a violent crackdown on nationwide protests in Iran earlier this month, which left thousands of people dead. The demonstrations pushed EU states to back tougher action rather than escalation.
This will put them on the same footing with Daesh, Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda. Those who operate through terror must be treated as terrorists. Ministers also imposed sanctions on those responsible for the brutal crackdown of protests, including the Minister of Interior. Repression cannot go unanswered.
The IRGC was created after Iran's 1979 revolution to protect the ruling clerical system. Over time, it has become one of the most powerful institutions in the country, controlling large parts of the economy, the armed forces, and Iran's missile and nuclear programs. Tehran condemned the decision, with Iran's foreign minister calling it a strategic mistake that would damage Europe's own interests. At the same time, dozens of protesters gathered outside the European Council in Brussels, welcoming the announcement.
We don't ask any intervention inside Iran. We don't ask to start a war with Iran, for America to bomb us. We don't ask all of that. What we just ask is support us like that. Just say we do not negotiate with terrorists and it ends there. The rest is up to the people of Iran inside Iran. Like it's their voice and we need to hear them.
In fact, it's a very, very a strong signal from the European Union about in supporting of the Iranian people and stopping the appeasement policy.
Alongside the designation, the EU also imposed new sanctions on senior Iranian officials, media regulators, and technology firms linked to repression and surveillance, tightening pressure on Tehran while keeping diplomatic channels open.
Staying on this topic, US President Donald Trump says he may be open to talks with Iran. He told reporters on Thursday that several large US warships are en route to the country, adding he hopes they won't be needed. Trump says he's not made a decision on military action, but warned the US would respond if Iran restarted its nuclear program or continued to target protesters. Here's more.
Mr. President, have you had any conversations with Iran in the last few days, and are you planning on any?
I have had, and I am planning on it, yeah. We have a lot of very big, very powerful ships sailing to Iran right now, and it would be great if we didn't have to use them. Okay?
Can you say what the message was that you shared with Iranians?
Well, I told them two things. Number one, no nuclear, and number two, stop killing protesters. They're killing them by the thousands. You know, I stopped 837 hangings 2 weeks ago, but they're going to have to do something. Nobody's seen anything like it.
The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in China this week, becoming the first British leader to make the trip in 8 years. Talks in Beijing have focused on visas, trade and major investment as London signals a more practical but cautious approach to relations with China. Our UK correspondent Zainab Farahidze has more.
It's been a busy start for British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's visit to China, the first for a UK Prime Minister in 8 years. Starmer arrived in Beijing on Wednesday, beginning the trip with meetings and setting the tone for what Downing Street calls a more practical relationship with China. But the key developments came on Thursday, as Starmer held talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping, with both sides signaling an effort to improve relations after several difficult years. Downing Street says Starmer wants cooperation where possible, while also raising issues where the UK disagrees. One of the biggest announcements on Thursday was on travel. China has agreed in principle to allow British citizens to visit for up to 30 days without needing a visa, which would make it easier for tourists and business travelers to go to China. Starmer welcomed the move, saying it could help British companies and improve people-to-people links. Trade was also high on the agenda. The leaders discussed areas of economic cooperation, including British exports such as whiskey, and they also talked about tackling illegal migration and people smuggling networks. Starmer also raised sensitive topics, including human rights, so no major breakthrough was announced. A key business headline came from pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca, which said it will invest around $15 billion in China by 2030. The company plans to expand research and manufacturing there, and Starmer presented it as a major win for British business during the visit. And alongside diplomacy and deals, there was also a symbolic moment on Thursday. Starmer visited Beijing's famous Forbidden City, one of China's most historic landmarks, highlighting the cultural side of the trip. So, while the visit began on Wednesday with arrival and preparation, Thursday delivered the main headlines: visas, investment, trade talks, and a clear effort by Starmer to restart engagement with China while still approaching the relationship carefully. Zainab Farahidze, News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
And that relationship has come under scrutiny from the UK's ally, President Donald Trump. He warned the United Kingdom against expanding business ties with China, calling such cooperation very dangerous. Speaking to reporters in Washington, Trump said similar engagement would be even riskier for Canada, arguing that closer economic links with Beijing would not serve either country's interests.
Well, it's very dangerous for them to do that, and it's even more dangerous, I think, for Canada to get into business with China. Canada's not doing well. They're doing very poorly, and you can't look at China as the answer. I know China very well. I know President Xi's a friend of mine. I know him very well, but that's a big hurdle to go over when you get Canada. The first thing they're going to do is say you're not allowed to play ice hockey anymore. That's not good. Canada's not going to like that.
US President Donald Trump has threatened new tariffs on countries that supply oil to Cuba, escalating pressure on the communist-run island. The move follows an executive order declaring a national emergency and authorizing trade measures, though no specific tariff rates or countries were named. Trump said Cuba will not be able to survive, insisting the government has failed its people, while denying claims that the US is trying to deliberately choke the country. Havana has rejected the approach, saying the United States has no moral authority to force a deal on Cuba. Over to Niger, where the military leader blames France, Benin and the Ivory Coast for an overnight attack on the country's main international airport. The government warns it could respond to what it calls foreign interference. Here's more on that report.
Gunfire and loud explosions were heard just before midnight on Wednesday around Niger's international airport in Niamey. The country's military ruler accuses France, Benin and the Ivory Coast of backing an attack. General Abdurrahmane Tiani says those countries for sponsoring the overnight assault on Diori Hamani International Airport. He warned of retaliation, though no evidence was presented to support the claims.
We congratulate all the defense and security forces who knew how to coordinate their action, as well as the Russian partners who professionally defended their security sector. We remind the sponsors of these mercenaries, notably French President Emmanuel Macron, Benin President Patrice Talon, Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara. We have listened to them bark enough. They should also prepare to hear us roar.
Officials say 20 attackers were killed, while 4 Nigerian soldiers were injured. 11 people were arrested in connection with the incident. State television reported that one of those killed was a French national. Several aircraft were damaged while parked on the runway, with minor damage but no passengers or crew were hurt. Calm returned to Niamey by Thursday morning. Shops and schools reopened, although security remains tight near the airport. Since taking power, Niger's military leaders have cut ties with Western countries and moved closer to Russia, following a similar path to Mali and Burkina Faso as violence linked to extremist groups continues across the Sahel.
The United Nations is pressing all sides to commit to the second stage of the Gaza ceasefire. The focus is on easing tensions, reinforcing security and setting the groundwork for further Israeli troop pullbacks. Officials say any disarmament of armed groups would be tied to a phased withdrawal overseen by the US, Egypt and Qatar. Here's that report.
Demilitarization of Gaza will include an internationally funded weapons buyback program. That is according to what the United States has told the UN Security Council. Speaking on Wednesday, US Ambassador Mike Waltz said weapons held by militant groups would be decommissioned through an agreed process. The plan is part of a broader ceasefire arrangement reached in October. Palestinian militant group Hamas retains control of just under half of Gaza following an October ceasefire deal brokered by US President Donald Trump. The agreement ties further Israeli troop withdrawals to Hamas giving up its weapons. Washington says it will pressure Hamas to disarm, working with 26 countries that have joined President Donald Trump's Board of Peace. The board also operates in consultation with the Palestinian National Committee.
Hamas must not have any role in the governance of Gaza directly or indirectly in any form, period. All military, terror, and offensive infrastructure, including tunnels and weapon production facilities, will be destroyed and not rebuilt. International, independent monitors will supervise a process of demilitarization of Gaza to include placing weapons permanently beyond use through an agreed process of decommissioning and supported by an internationally funded buyback and reintegration program.
Sources say Hamas has agreed to discuss disarmament with other Palestinian factions and mediators. However, 2 Hamas officials told Reuters they have not received any detailed proposal from the United States or from mediators. Israel says Hamas remains heavily armed. Israeli Ambassador Danny Danon raised the issue at the Security Council.
Hamas still remains heavily armed. Let me show you the numbers. It still holds thousands of rockets, anti-tank missiles, and tens of thousands of Kalashnikov rifles. In total, Hamas still holds roughly 60,000 assault rifles. These weapons are used not only against us, against Israel, but against Gazans who oppose Hamas rule.
In November, the Security Council approved the Board of Peace through 2027, focused only on Gaza. The board will help manage reconstruction and deploy a temporary international force. US Ambassador Mike Waltz said the force would improve security and allow Israeli troops to withdraw as Gaza is demilitarized under oversight by the United States, Egypt and Qatar.
Residents in the West Bank are lining up for hours to buy cooking gas. It's after a shortage driven by reduced deliveries and rising demand has now stretched into its second month. Here's more on that story.
Palestinians in the West Bank are lining up before dawn to buy cooking gas as a shortage stretches into its second month. In the southern city of Hebron, long queues form outside gas stations, with families carrying empty cylinders and waiting hours for supplies.
For more than 20 days, we have had this issue. For the past 4 days, I've been trying to get cooking gas. Today, I came at 4 a.m. so I could get some.
Suppliers say the crisis began in December, driven by cold weather and reduced deliveries.
There was a shortage from Israeli suppliers due to last month's weather, and the Iran war caused problems because the Israeli companies did not give us our full share. They only gave what remained, which is not enough for the Palestinian Authority.
Officials say many households are also using cooking gas for heating, further increasing demand. So far, authorities have not said when supplies will return to normal, leaving many families uncertain about how they will meet daily needs.
An outbreak of the Nipah virus in India's eastern state of West Bengal has heightened concerns in China and several Southeast Asian countries. The situation has prompted them to tighten health screening operations at airports as millions prepare to travel for the Lunar New Year holiday. But what is Nipah virus and how worried should people be? Here's some of that report.
Nipah virus is a serious infectious disease that causes occasional outbreaks in parts of Asia. Since December 2025, 2 confirmed cases have been reported in West Bengal, India. While the risk to the general public remains very low, experts say it is important to understand the virus. Nipah is rare, but it can be extremely dangerous. It mainly spreads from animals to humans, especially from infected fruit bats. The virus can sometimes cause no symptoms at all, but in many cases, it leads to severe illness. The fatality rate ranges from 40 to 75%, depending on how quickly cases are detected and treated, and on the strength of the local healthcare system. Nipah can also spread from person to person, but this does not happen easily. Outbreaks are usually small and tend to be contained.
As far as we can tell, the main risk of person-to-person transmission comes from fairly close contact, typically when you're caring for somebody who's quite ill. But it must be said there aren't a lot of there's not a huge amount of evidence on which to base a lot of these judgments.
Symptoms usually begin suddenly with a fever or flu-like illness. This can then develop into more serious problems, including inflammation of the brain, known as encephalitis. Some patients also suffer severe breathing difficulties. In the most serious cases, seizures can occur, and people may fall into a coma within days. Most people who recover make a full recovery, but some are left with long-term neurological problems. At present, there are no approved vaccines or specific treatments for Nipah virus. However, several potential vaccines are being tested, including one developed by scientists at Oxford University, who were also involved in creating a COVID-19 vaccine.
We're going to take a break now. When I return, I'll discuss the key regional headlines with a studio guest to help us unpack more. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's take you through the news of what's happening across the region. And first we go to Turkey, where the President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that Turkic world will leave its mark this century. He made the remarks after his meeting with Uzbekistan President Shavkat Mirziyoyev in Ankara on Thursday. The leaders signed 10 agreements on health, education, energy, culture and economic cooperation. Erdogan added that trade between Turkey and Uzbekistan had tripled in the past 10 years with a goal of $5 billion. Prolonged internet outages are adding to the strain of daily life in Iran, disrupting livelihoods, restricting access of information, and deepening feelings of isolation. This report here hears directly from Iranians on how the shutdowns are reshaping work and the way people stay connected.
For many across Iran, the outage has become another daily struggle layered on top of months of uncertainty. Iranian citizens and businesses continue to suffer from a nationwide internet blackout imposed as authorities deployed heavy force to suppress widespread anti-government protests. The shutdown, in place since January 8th, has disrupted commerce in an already fragile economy.
I think it's been 17 days since we've had no internet. We have no information from outside. We don't know anything about what happened in our city, in our country. We've been cut off from all the people we knew, and even from people who live outside of Iran.
Online employees say the blackout has hit their earnings hard and left families unable to communicate.
I have a series of classes. I teach. In fact, my online classes were cancelled, and naturally I lost money, and I'm still losing money.
The effect was that my classes were cancelled, my income stopped, and I also have another job. I am a book translator. I was translating books, and when translators work, they have to use sources like ChatGPT and Google Translate and all kinds of dictionaries, which were not accessible, and everything was closed.
Iranians also say the prolonged internet shutdown has left young Iranians feeling cut off from the modern world and deprived of basic access to information.
This period has been very difficult because, for example, a young person like me was thinking that it is now 2026 in the world. Everything is progressing. Conferences, special seminars are being held. The internet and applications are being developed. And we are living in a place where our natural right to have the internet and free access to news has been blocked. This right has been taken from us.
While limited access exists to domestic websites and school networks, broader connection to the global internet remains blocked, leaving Iranian businesses struggling to operate normally.
Kazakhstan says it has lost almost 4 million tons of oil exports following Ukrainian attacks on facilities of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium on Russian territory. Our correspondent from Kazakhstan has more details.
Kazakhstan lost around 3.8 million tons of oil exports following attacks on facilities of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. The figure was announced by Energy Minister Erlan Akhenchev. He stressed that the tankers attacked near CPC facilities were not linked to the so-called shadow fleet. Oil shipments continued despite higher insurance costs. And in annual terms, the country is not expected to lose anything. The Caspian Pipeline Consortium continues to operate at full capacity, loading 2 tankers per day. Offshore loading units number 1 and 3 are functioning normally, but unit number 2, damaged in the attack, remains in a semi-submerged state. So far, weather conditions and strong internal currents have prevented the unit from being refloated and fully inspected. According to the minister, 2 new offshore loading units have been ordered in the United Arab Emirates and are expected to be delivered within 30 days. The situation remains under special government control as around 80% of Kazakhstan's export oil is transported through the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. The latest attack on the CPC took place on November 29th. Unmanned boats destroyed an offshore loading unit in the waters of the port of Novorossiysk. Following the incident, Kazakhstan's foreign ministry lodged a protest with Ukraine. The energy ministry said that such actions against purely civilian critical infrastructure were unacceptable and noted that alternative oil export routes were being considered. Ukraine mounted repeated attacks on Russia's oil refineries and crude oil terminals in an attempt to undermine one of the most important sources of income for the Russian war economy. Farida Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Authorities in Afghanistan say at least 61 people have died following recent snow and rain. The severe weather is also deepening the humanitarian crisis. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
Afghanistan is facing a deepening humanitarian crisis as severe winter weather compounds poverty and food shortages across the country. Heavy snowfall and freezing temperatures are pushing already vulnerable families to the brink. Authorities say recent snow and rain have killed at least 61 people and left more than 110 others suffering from weather-related health problems. Roads remain blocked in some areas, while daily survival has become a struggle for millions. 25-year-old Kabul resident Faiz earns just 200 Afghanis a day, around $300 selling street food. It's freezing now, with ice underfoot and a biting chill in the air. I set up my stall every morning at 9 and work until around 7 or 8 at night. I have to work every single day. If I take a day off, there's no food for my family of 9. No matter how cold it gets, I have to earn a meal for my family. There's no one else at home who can bring in money. Faiz's iron sheet home offers little protection from the cold, while the rising cost of fuel and firewood has added to the strain. The room is freezing cold. My daughter is sick, but I can't afford to buy her medicine. It's very difficult for me to decide whether I should use my 200 Afghanis' daily income to pay the rent first, buy medicine for my child, or keep my family fed. Severe winter conditions are worsening Afghanistan's humanitarian emergency. According to a new report by the World Food Programme, an estimated 17.4 million Afghans are expected to face food insecurity by March this year. The agency also warns that 14.9 million women and children are likely to suffer from malnutrition. As temperatures continue to drop, humanitarian organizations warn that without urgent assistance, many families will be unable to cope with the harsh winter months ahead. For now, families like Faiz's face an impossible choice each day between warmth, medicine, and food, as Afghanistan's winter tightens its grip.
German Chancellor Friedrich Merz said Germany would not allow its Afghanistan mission to be discredited or belittled. His comments follow remarks by US President Donald Trump during a visit to Davos last week, in which he suggested that America's NATO allies in Afghanistan avoided frontline service. Here's what Friedrich Merz had to say.
59 Bundeswehr soldiers have lost their lives during the course of almost 20 years of service in Afghanistan. Well over 100 have been injured, some seriously, in combat operations and attacks. We will not allow this mission, which we also carried out in the interests of our ally, the United States of America, we will not allow this mission to be discredited or belittled.
Wir lassen es nicht zu, dass dieser Einsatz
Azerbaijan's Energy Minister Parviz Shahbazov has held a European Commission official on expanding energy cooperation between Azerbaijan and the European Union. The discussions focused on renewable energy, including solar and wind power, as well as gas supplies to the bloc. The sides also reviewed major electricity transmission projects, including route across the Black Sea and a proposed green energy corridor linking the Caspian region to Europe, aimed at strengthening long-term energy security. Ambassadors from the European Union member states have approved a €20 million military aid package for Armenia. This was reported by Radio Free Europe's Europe Affairs editor Richard Jozvak, citing diplomatic sources. The assistance provided under the European Peace Facility will consist of non-lethal military equipment. In 2024, the EU also allocated €10 million to Armenia through the European Peace Facility, marking the first military support of this kind in the history of EU-Armenia relations. This week in Berlin, the German Parliamentary Society hosted a timely discussion titled Turning Point in the South Caucasus, Historic Peace Between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Held for the first time in this format in Germany, the event brought together senior German officials, policymakers, experts and the ambassadors of Azerbaijan and Armenia to reflect on the progress achieved in the peace process and the road ahead. Joining me now to discuss these key themes from this meeting is Nargiz Mammadova, an expert in international relations at the STEM Centre. Welcome to the programme.
Hello. Thank you for the invitation.
My first question really is, what does this meeting tell us about Europe's evolving perception of the South Caucasus?
Well, I think that the Europe, EU's eye was always on the South Caucasus, but from the different perspective. It was from the side of business, it was from the side of economics, investments, and etc. And even after the end of the Second Karabakh War, they're always keeping hand on the South Caucasus, on the peace building and on the conflict resolution, on the peace facilities and peace talks between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Even there were a number of talks in the European Union previously by the mediation of the head of the European Council, Charles Michel, in the past. And also there were a visit of the Joseph Borrell many months ago when he was in European Union to Azerbaijan and Armenia. But nowadays, this kind of meetings is kind of a new trend, because I will tell even a story that in many think tanks in Europe, while previously they started to talk about the peace, talks about this peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I'm gonna tell, before the Washington summit, they tried to make a separate meeting with the Azerbaijan ambassador, for example, or separate meeting with Armenian ambassador. Now the new trend actually is giving a lot of hope that this kind of meetings is now going to be transforming and moving from one city to another. So today it's in Berlin, in Germany, next it will be in Italy, then in UK, then in Spain, and etc. Of course, it's a very good for understanding that the peace process is on the highest volume right now. The second, what we're gonna say, that it's not just about the peace talks, it's about the economic prosperity of the South Caucasus. It's about the trip corridor and the vision of the Europe about the trip corridor. I would say a very fun fact that before the Washington summit, the European Union countries are not so much talking about the Zangezur corridor, because there was no trip project and etc. When Azerbaijan even talking about the prosperity of middle corridor connected with the Zangezur corridor, the European Union was some kind of confused. But right now, after the Washington summit, there was a push for the European countries to think more about the prosperity, about the productivity and the profit of the trip corridor along with the Zangezur corridor. I will tell even more than some universities in UK, even UK is not EU, but still geographically, UK, the universities of UK, especially Birmingham, Glasgow, and they're not talking directly about the Zangezur corridor, but they're moving forward to it. They are doing some researches on the middle corridor, on Belt and Road Initiative, and the middle corridor being as a part of the Belt and Road Initiative. They're trying to investigate and did research on the ports of Aktau port, of Alat port, of port of the also Anaklia port, Poti, which is in Georgia, and they're also started to look at and considering the effectivity of the Zangezur corridor, which is very good fact and very good, notice from the European, area, from the EU itself also.
Okay, well, in that sense, do you think Germany is increasingly viewing the region as a zone of basically of frozen conflicts, but as an emerging space of opportunity, stability, and strategic connectivity.
Definitely opportunities, because I'm going to say that even some these kind of meetings telling us that the Germany is interested in the peace process, how the peace process is going, and maybe after this there will be some business meetings and etc. Because it's like a scene that we already have seen before, that after these meetings always some opportunities coming to the table. And Germany companies even previously said that they are very okay and very open to cooperate with both sides on the South Caucasus. Yes, but there's one thing that we do need to consider is the point of the Georgia, because Georgia has some kind of, let's say, non-stable relations with European countries. And you know, it's very interesting how things changed, because before the Georgia was maybe the #1 partner of the European Union in the South Caucasus, and now on the contrary, Azerbaijan and Armenia becoming the #1 or maybe one of the priorities of the European Union on their neighborhood policy.
Right. Well, now I want to look a little bit more at Germany's strategic interest in the region. Do you think Berlin is recognizing the sustainable peace in the South Caucasus directly supporting European supply chains? And does Azerbaijan stand at the heart of like this emerging Euro-Asian equation for that?
Well, for this question, I'm going to start with the fact that like 1 week ago, let's say, the Azerbaijan started to export their gas to Germany and to Austria. And I think that there will be next countries that we're gonna heard, like in the recent future, we're gonna heard about. We're gonna hear about new projects, not about not about gas. I will say more on the green energy also. So in this case, Azerbaijan is a hub, becoming a hub, not just a transit hub on the middle corridor, on the Belt and Road Initiative or Zangezur corridor. No, let's put this aside. Let's talk more about that Azerbaijan is becoming a green energy hub. It's becoming energy hub because Europe is in the need of the green energy. And in the case of green energy and in the case of the gas, Europe is on the, like, they want something to have on the cold winters. And of course, Azerbaijan is the reliable partner of EU through the South gas corridor. It's a reliable partner, and it's not only said by the Azerbaijani side, it's also have been told by the European side from the officials from the European Union, like Ursula von der Leyen and other officials. For the Germany, it's very essential to have Azerbaijan. Yes, its amount, it's not so big, but still to having a partner of Azerbaijan as a partner in the sector of energy is giving hope for the new areas of the cooperation with Azerbaijan. Also, Azerbaijan will become a new digital hub because the new agreements on the sidelines of the Davos Forum between Ilham, the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and with other mostly American countries are giving a view that Azerbaijan will become a digital hub between Europe and Asia. You know, in each case, whenever you turn, Azerbaijan is going to be a bridge. So, and this bridge is very needable for the European market.
Well, on that then, if I'm just going to quickly ask you this final question, because our time is running out. Does Azerbaijan continue to pursue a pragmatic, forward-looking foreign policy? Then does the South Caucasus stand at becoming, as you mentioned, that bridge between, you know, and no longer a barrier between Europe and Eurasia, but more as a connective kind of fence, you could say, or connective motorway between Eurasia, Europe, Turkey, all these other places? Do you think they're in the prime position to now open up business and open up the economy in that sense?
Well, first of all, let's talk that the before Karabakh conflict, our pain and the main mission of the Azerbaijan foreign policy is to resolve this conflict, is to restore our territorial integrity and sovereignty. And after the Second Karabakh War, when the Azerbaijan became like a winner and got a victory, our main key priority in the foreign policy is multilateralism, and to have not to set on the region of the South Caucasus, because on the South Caucasus the agenda is already set. And we are now focused on different regions. And when a country is like theory in the practice, when one country, even a small country like Azerbaijan, is focusing on several regions, it's like unconditionally and unconsciously creating a hub and connecting the regions. For example, let's talk again green energy. On the sidelines of COP29, Azerbaijan signed a green energy deal with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. On the same, Azerbaijan is having this cooperation on the countries of the Black Sea. We are connecting Central Asia with European countries, with the Black Sea region. Another example where can connect the Central Asian countries, transferring their green energy. The Central Asian countries, especially Uzbekistan, is doing great in the green energy. So they want to export it via Azerbaijan to Nakhchivan, from Nakhchivan to Turkey, and from Turkey to the European markets. It's obvious.
Yes, no, definitely. Nagis, you've given us so much information. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on all that information.
Thank you very much.
We're now heading into a short break. When I come back, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani, live on A News. Here are your top stories for the day. Trump says Putin will not attack Ukraine cities for a week due to the cold weather. The EU lists Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. And Niger's military ruler vows retaliation after gunfire and explosions heard in the capital. I'm now going to take you through the look of the stories shaping the globe across the day. And I go first to the A News website, which is leading with the story Trump says Putin will not attack Ukraine cities during the cold. So it's something that he said that he's mentioned to Russia's Vladimir Putin has agreed not to attack Kyiv cities due to the extraordinary cold weather. However, Russia has not confirmed any such agreement. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed Trump's announcement and said he expected Russia to keep its promise. Trump did not specify when the pause would actually begin, but temperatures in the Ukrainian capital are due to plummet from tonight to minus 24 Celsius to minus 11 Fahrenheit in the next few days. Russia has intensified its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure during this bitter winter. Okay, now the next story that is also making headlines is EU and Iran. So the EU has sanctioned, has basically put the EU has listed Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. And that is actually in response to the regime's brutal repression of protesters. In a statement, the EU's foreign policy leader, Chief Kaya Kallis said repression cannot go unanswered. Any regime that kills thousands of its own people is working toward its own demise, is what she has stated. The EU also added 15 Iranian government officials and 6 organizations to its sanctions list for their role in serious human rights violations in repression to protesters. We know that this has come after what Donald Trump told Tehran to negotiate a deal on its future nuclear program or face a possible military attack. Now, an interesting fact about all of this is that Russia has deepened ties with Iran since the start of its full-scale invasion on Ukraine. But more than 30,000 people have been killed due to the latest wave of repression in Iran, and that's according to some estimates we have been able to find. Along with that, human rights groups say a revenge campaign has been unleashed by the Iranian regime, with doctors and healthcare workers facing death sentences for treating badly injured protesters. Okay, and we go to our final headline that's also making on the front pages, and that's Trump threatening Cuba or anyone that is supplying Cuba with much needed oil. So President Trump has signed an executive order to impose new tariffs on any country that supplies oil to Cuba, the latest move in Washington's campaign pressure on Havana. The order signed by Trump on Thursday describes the Cuban government as an unusual and extraordinary threat to U.S. national security. The regime, he says the regime aligns itself with and provides support for numerous hostile countries, transnational terrorist groups, and malign actors adverse to the U.S., including Russia, China, Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah, is what the Trump order states. Now, this has actually come after the U.S. Forces abducted the Venezuelan president Nicolas Maduro and his wife earlier this month, and the US has taken effective control of Venezuela's oil sector. Trump has promised to stop all oil shipments previously sent to Cuba. He also spoke several times about acting against Cuba, saying earlier that the Cuban leadership should make a deal before it's too late, without specifying the nature of such a deal or the consequences. Now, those were our headlines for the day, and now we move to our first top story of this morning. And the US President Donald Trump says he secured a temporary pause in Russian strikes on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities, citing extreme winter conditions. The Kremlin has stopped short of confirming any formal agreement, while the European Union accuses Moscow of using energy and winter as weapons of war. Here's the latest on that story.
US President Donald Trump says Russian President Vladimir Putin has agreed to refrain from firing on Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities for 1 week, citing record-breaking winter conditions.
And because of the cold, extreme cold, they have the same that we do. And I personally asked President Putin not to fire into Kiev and the various towns for a week. And he agreed to do that because on top of everything else, that's not what they need is missiles coming into their towns and cities. So I just thought I should say it. I thought it was a very good thing. And Ukraine was almost, they didn't believe it, but they were very happy about it because they are struggling badly.
Moscow has not confirmed any formal agreement. The Kremlin declined to comment on reports of a broader pause in strikes, including on energy infrastructure, while saying diplomatic contacts remain possible.
I can't comment on that yet. The modalities will be negotiated until the meeting itself, but everything will be done to ensure the possibility of continuing the dialogue.
From Brussels, the European Union delivered a sharply critical response. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaya Kallis accused Moscow of targeting civilians and deliberately using winter as a weapon, while announcing new emergency support for Ukraine.
Russia is not making an even token effort towards peace. Now, energy is the new front line. The EU is responding with biggest ever winter aid package that discovers emergency equipment, funding and energy deliveries. Just today, we provided an extra 500 generators and 50 million euro for energy support. Overall, our energy fund has surpassed 1.6 billion euro.
Despite diplomatic efforts, Russian strikes have already damaged Ukraine's energy network, leaving hundreds of apartment buildings in Kyiv without heating or electricity, as temperatures remain well below freezing. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the US initiative, saying a pause in attacks on energy infrastructure could ease pressure on civilians, but warned that the real test will be whether any commitments are honored.
Trump says Republicans and Democrats have agreed to keep the vast majority of the US government funded. He added he was working with Congress to prevent another shutdown. The agreement separates immigration discussions from the main spending package and extends Department of Homeland Security funding for 2 weeks to allow further talks. Trump warned a shutdown could still occur. The Senate abandoned hopes of passing the legislation late on Thursday and will resume its work on Friday. The European Union has taken its toughest step yet against Iran, designating the Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organisation. The move allows the EU states to criminalise links to the group and sharply increases pressure on Tehran. Here's more on that story.
The region does not need a new war. That's according to European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas when asked if the bloc would support US military action against Iran. The comment comes as the EU has designated Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, as a terrorist organisation. It marks the bloc's strongest move yet against Tehran. The move follows a violent crackdown on nationwide protests in Iran earlier this month, which left thousands of people dead. The demonstrations pushed EU states to back tougher action rather than escalation.
This will put them on the same footing with Daesh, Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda. Those who operate through terror must be treated as terrorists. Ministers also imposed sanctions on those responsible for the brutal crackdown of protests, including the Minister of Interior. Repression cannot go unanswered.
The IRGC was created after Iran's 1979 revolution to protect the ruling clerical system. Over time, it has become one of the most powerful institutions in the country, controlling large parts of the economy, the armed forces, and Iran's missile and nuclear programs. Tehran condemned the decision, with Iran's foreign minister calling it a strategic mistake that would damage Europe's own interests. At the same time, dozens of protesters gathered outside the European Council in Brussels, welcoming the announcement.
We don't ask any intervention inside Iran. We don't ask to start a war with Iran, for America to bomb us. We don't ask all of that. What we just ask is support us like that. Just say we do not negotiate with terrorists and it ends there. The rest is up to the people of Iran inside Iran. Like it's their voice and we need to hear them.
In fact, it's a very, very a strong signal from the European Union about in supporting of the Iranian people and stopping the appeasement policy.
Alongside the designation, the EU also imposed new sanctions on senior Iranian officials, media regulators, and technology firms linked to repression and surveillance, tightening pressure on Tehran while keeping diplomatic channels open.
They're going to have to do something were the last words out of President Trump's mouth. And it's something we're now going to discuss along with the new developments from the EU and Kaja Kallas' decision to list Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. Joining me now to discuss this and the US military buildup in the Gulf is Melih Demirtaş, former diplomat, political analyst in Ankara, Turkey. Welcome to the program. My first question really is, the EU has taken a very firm step against Iran's revolutionary group, and that carries legal consequences. Why do you think the EU has taken this position, and will this impact Iran to change its position?
Yes, maybe this is the most important part of European ideals or structures. As we all know that after Second World War, this is what Europe really wants to do. I mean, in world politics, first of all, starting from its own region, but I think for the other geography, which directly affects maybe this future politics of Europe, I think to call this Iranian Revolutionary Guard something like a terrorist group, it's a very brave, quote-unquote, decision in such a time. because already Mr. Trump still very boldly continues his threats. Maybe just in one night or one day he can really start such an operation, high scale, maybe military conflict. And in such these days, maybe what we are all expect from some European partners, more diplomacy. But such a maybe understanding or such a declaration from High Representative of European Union of this Revolutionary Guard, because we must understand that this Revolutionary Guard is also one of the important pillars of the regime last 40, 50 years of this Iranian geography. And now to call such a pillar as a terrorist group, of course, it's something like threat, of course, to diplomatic idea or diplomacy or soft power ideal of maybe Europe upon Iran. So what we will see after that date is also Mr. Arakchi, the foreign minister of Iran, who also will visit, I think today, tomorrow, Ankara very soon, also said that Europe something like makes an important burden upon Iran because of this policy, because we know that European partners and Iran once had an important channel to communication. Compared to US, it's much more positive, especially in the near past.
I see. And then what do you think about this then? Iran has hit back at the EU over this, and its foreign minister, as you mentioned, Abbas Araghchi, says the EU is fanning flames of war in their region. Is he right to say that?
Yes, Mr. Araghchi is also making his best. I think we all know that his face is like a positive, of course, quote unquote, compared to other regime figures inside Iran. Like Mr. Pezeshkian and Araghchi, such figures are much more diplomatic figures. Still, we have them, I think, for talking, because talking is everything, Ms. Nadia, in this such a conflictual world politics. But with this saying, yes, with flames especially, he also maybe made a bold statement against, of course, first of all, European Commissioner, first of all, European bureaucracy, maybe, because we already know that Iran has some important diplomacy still with some other partners in Europe, singular countries. I mean, with maybe Germany, with France, I mean, with other countries, they have still some channels opening for diplomacy. But we will see, because United States, I think, like Mr. Trump once said to Ukrainian, Zelensky, Mr. President Zelensky, you don't have any cards. I think you remember that with his Russian case. I think now Mr. Trump has many cards in his hands because of his military power, because of his, as he's saying, such big and beautiful ships. Unfortunately, it's really a threatening situation for these regional policies. But still, we will see, because Iran must be a real skillful, especially in these days, diplomatic player, unless it doesn't want any high-scale war, especially in such a very, very critical time of this region.
Well, according to the US-based human rights activist news agency, the death toll from the nationwide protest that we've seen at the beginning of this year climbed to just over 6,000 people have died. And Iran has partially, as we know, lifted the internet blackout ban. Do you think protests could restart again? How do we feel that will the Iranian people continue to push against the current regime there?
Yes, this is the most important and sad part of the story, Ms. Nadia, because we already know that there are important, huge problems inside the regime of Iran. Yes, the people are people in everywhere of the world, in every regime, whether it's a Western standard democracy, whether it's a country in Asia, Middle East, or Eurasia, the people are always the same people. They really demand something for their welfare of their family, welfare of their individual freedoms. It cannot be changed so easily, like the 60s, 70s, like the 19th century. This is all the part of the maybe game of these days, the politics and social life. And Iran wants to play this game maybe with the terms of this early 20th century, maybe 19th century, because all these technological advancements, with all these people's voices, I think the regime also, even it is make it more democratic or not, at least it must understand, once Mr. Pezeshkian also of important figures still in Iran said that they really want to listen to people. Because what we are really do not want to see also as Turkey, I think as Azerbaijan or other important players here too, we do not want to see a real interference from some countries, very strong countries. I mean, first of all, United States here, but it's also can be Russia, China, because Iran already said that it can make a very quick military operations with Russia and China, but it is not the response of such a level of the age. Because what we really want to see is real people's choices and people's solutions. And I think already the figures like Mr. Pezeshkian and Mr. Arakci, they already know the answer that some democratization is needed urgently also inside Iran.
So in that sense then, what do you think Iran should do in response to Trump not wanting them to have nuclear weapons? Something they're saying that they have this for peaceful purposes. Their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, what they say. Trump saying, no, we don't want you to have anything. So what should Iran do with obviously a war looming around their actual region?
The nuclear case as the human rights issue is also the other important pillar or the framework of all these discussions or clashes, especially in the last maybe 10, 20 years. Because we already know that Iran really showed this motivation once. I mean, with especially important agencies like International Atomic Agency, also with the bodies of United Nations. It really opened also all the doors, maybe once for the inspections, once it really showed that it created a nuclear capacity for peaceful purposes. Here we must stop and think that, yes, the countries has such a right, Ms. Nadia. This nuclear issue, also as Turkey, we're always discussing this because once we missed the train, unfortunately, as Turkey, we could not have real utilization from this nuclear power once. Iran, especially after maybe this 1990s, it really stimulated its energy to create this energy, but it cannot maybe express itself much more peacefully. So what it really wants to, should do, it's maybe open again with full dialogue to, first of all, United Nations and international dialogue. But I think also United States at that time has an important obligation that, like Mr. Trump always said, it must not deny this legitimacy or responsibility of international organizations. Because if United States declares that I am the only power, then there can be no legitimate ground to discuss, as also Iran sometimes declaring that it is open for such international organizations.
Well, thank you, Mr. Meleh Demirtas, for your comments on that. That's been very helpful to our audience.
Thank you for having me.
Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney said the US should respect Canadian sovereignty. This follows a meeting that he stated in relation to Alberta separatists had talked to Trump administration about the province possibly leaving Canada. Here's what he had to say.
I expect the U.S. administration to respect Canadian sovereignty. I'm always clear in my conversation with President Trump to that effect, and then move on to what we can do together.
Moving to Latin America now, and Venezuela has approved changes to its hydrocarbons law. The move comes as the government points to possible steps by the US to ease restrictions and reopen commercial links. Here's more.
Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, has signed a reform of the country's hydrocarbons law aimed at opening the energy sector and attracting foreign investment.
Today, I received a call from United States President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. They inform me that we are taking important steps, including lifting restrictions on Venezuela's commercial airspace, so that airlines and investors can return.
Rodriguez made the announcement in Caracas after the National Assembly approved the changes. The reform cuts taxes, gives private producers more autonomy, and allows asset transfers and service outsourcing.
In the coming hours, you will see Venezuela's first export of natural gas. The ship is already here and will depart shortly.
The government says the changes are meant to revive oil and gas production after years of tight state control and international sanctions.
This law reflects President Nicolas Maduro's vision for the future. It was developed together with him, and today we are delivering it for the people of Venezuela.
The reform marks a shift after 2 decades of strict nationalization, which saw foreign-owned assets expropriated. Following the law's approval, Washington issued a general license easing sanctions on Venezuela's energy sector, allowing transactions linked to oil exports.
US President Donald Trump has threatened new tariffs on countries that supply oil to Cuba, escalating pressure on the communist-run island. The move follows an executive order declaring a national emergency and authorizing trade measures, though no specific tariff rates or countries were named. Trump said Cuba will not be able to survive, insisting the government has failed its people, while denying claims that the US is trying to deliberately choke the country. Havana has rejected the approach, saying the US has no moral authority to force a deal on Cuba. Over to Niger, where the military leader has blamed France, Benin and the Ivory Coast for an overnight attack on the country's main international airport. The government warns it could respond to what it calls foreign interference. Here's more on that report.
Gunfire and loud explosions were heard just before midnight on Wednesday around Niger's international airport in Niamey. The country's military ruler accuses France, Benin and the Ivory Coast of backing an attack. General Abdourahmane Tiani says those countries for sponsoring the overnight assault on Diori Hamani International Airport. He warned of retaliation, though no evidence was presented to support the claims.
We congratulate all the defense and security forces who knew how to coordinate their action, as well as the Russian partners who professionally defended their security sector. We remind the sponsors of these mercenaries, notably French President Emmanuel Macron, Benin President Patrice Talon, Ivorian President Alassane Ouattara. We have listened to them bark enough. They should also prepare to hear us roar.
Officials say 20 attackers were killed, while 4 Nigerian soldiers were injured. 11 people were arrested in connection with the incident. State television reported that one of those killed was a French national. Several aircraft were damaged while parked on the runway, with minor damage but no passengers or crew were hurt. Calm returned to Niamey by Thursday morning. Shops and schools reopened, although security remains tight near the airport. Since taking power, Niger's military leaders have cut ties with Western countries and moved closer to Russia, following a similar path to Mali and Burkina Faso as violence linked to extremist groups continues across the Sahel.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has met with UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan on Thursday in Moscow. Putin said Russia is closely monitoring developments in Iran and wants to discuss the situation in talks at the Kremlin. Spokesperson Dmitry Peskov added that the potential for talks between the US and Iran has not yet been exhausted. He warned that any military action against Tehran could create chaos in the region. Let's take a short break. When I return, I'll bring you more updates on today's global stories. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now to the rest of the stories. US President Donald Trump has once again escalated pressure on Iran, warning that the US is prepared to use military force if Tehran does not comply with Washington's demands. The White House says multiple strike options are on the table. Our correspondent from Washington, Ubay Shanbanda, has more.
President Trump has once again threatened Iran with potential U.S. military strikes, telling reporters on Thursday evening that, quote, "We have a group headed out to a place called Iran, and hopefully we won't have to use them." Those were the words of the president. Trump also told reporters that he shared 2 main points with Iranian leadership. 1, no nuclear capabilities, and 2, Tehran must stop killing protesters. The president has reportedly been briefed by his military leadership on a number of potential kinetic military options, including the potential for American special forces to carry out raids deep inside Iran, including raids that would target sites believed to be holding enriched nuclear stockpiles. White House national security officials and the Pentagon have presented President Trump multiple attack options, including a large-scale bombing campaign that would target top echelons of Ayatollah Khamenei's government and targeting Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard facilities. Other options reportedly being presented to President Trump include cyber attacks or tougher sanctions on Iran. If President Trump gives the order as commander-in-chief of all military forces in the United States for a debilitating military strike including special operations, Israel is also expected to join, according to some officials here in Washington. And according to a new report in the New York Times, President Trump and his top advisors are taking into consideration that any major operation in Iran would be much more difficult than the recent military operation in Venezuela against Nicolas Maduro. Military planners here in Washington believe that U.S. forces would face far more danger and difficulty in carrying out a similar operation against Iranian forces, who are likely to present more of a challenge than their Venezuelan counterparts. I'm Ubi Shabander, A News, Washington.
Turning over to the UK, and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in China this week, becoming the first British leader to make the trip in 8 years. Talks in Beijing have focused on visas, trade and major investment, as London signals a more practical but cautious approach to relations with China. Our UK correspondent Zainab Faridze has more.
It's been a busy start for British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's visit to China, the first for a UK Prime Minister in 8 years. Starmer arrived in Beijing on Wednesday, beginning the trip with meetings and setting the tone for what Downing Street calls a more practical relationship with China. But the key developments came on Thursday, as Starmer held talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping, with both sides signaling an effort to improve relations after several difficult years. Downing Street says Starmer wants cooperation where possible, while also raising issues where the UK disagrees. One of the biggest announcements on Thursday was on travel. China has agreed in principle to allow British citizens to visit for up to 30 days without needing a visa, which would make it easier for tourists and business travelers to go to China. Starmer welcomed the move, saying it could help British companies and improve people-to-people links. Trade was also high on the agenda. The leaders discussed areas of economic cooperation, including British exports such as whiskey, and they also talked about tackling illegal migration and people smuggling networks. Starmer also raised sensitive topics, including human rights, so no major breakthrough was announced. A key business headline came from pharmaceutical giant AstraZeneca, which said it will invest around $15 billion in China by 2030. The company plans to expand research and manufacturing there, and Starmer presented it as a major win for British business during the visit. And alongside diplomacy and deals, there was also a symbolic moment on Thursday. Starmer visited Beijing's famous Forbidden City, one of China's most historic landmarks, highlighting the cultural side of the trip. So, while the visit began on Wednesday with arrival and preparation, Thursday delivered the main headlines: visas, investment, trade talks, and a clear effort by Starmer to restart engagement with China while still approaching the relationship carefully. Zainab Faridze, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Right, now it's not something you would normally see when you take a walk on a beach. An elephant seal named Panchito appeared in Los Ayala in Mexico. The 700-kilogram elephant seal took many beachgoers by surprise, as it was far from its natural habitat. Scientists say that this could be due to warming temperatures, forcing seals to change their feeding and resting routes. The environmental agency said he just needed a rest, which is common behavior for this type of species, according to the Navy Secretariat. Well, that's all from me today and for this week. So thank you so much for watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. I'll be back on Monday to take you through the latest updates throughout the day and into the morning. Take care.